Hello and welcome to Media Monitor on the SABC News Channel, independent and impartial. Now this is where we take a look inside the world of media, analysing the trends, the issues and the reporting of some of the week's top stories. I'm Peter Ndoro and this is what's coming up on the show today. We'll be taking a look at alarming allegations of censorship and unethical editorial behaviour at a major 24-hour news channel that surfaced this past week. We'll be taking a look at some of the biggest international stories in 2019, and we also have regular features including a Back in History a little later in the show. Remember, you can engage with us on social media using the SABC Media Monitor handle, which is hashtag SABC Media Monitor. All of that still to come, and we'll also be taking a look a little bit later on what's on the front pages of our newspapers. All of that still to come. All right, okay, we won't show you the newspaper covers because we haven't got them, but we will discuss them a little bit later on. Okay, so let's move on, and I'd like to introduce our guests today that are going to help us unpack what's been happening this week, and big stories they were indeed. And in studio today we are joined by the head of programs at Media Monitoring Africa, Tandy Smith, the editor at Behind the News Network, Joe Mhlanga, and also the CEO of Ambani Reputation Management, Shonim Karitu. The three of you, welcome. Give me a wave. There we go. So we got heavy hitters in today to chat to us about some pretty important issues, and those they're coming they'll be chatting to me in a short while. But first, the South African National Editors Forum, SANEF, said this week that it will soon meet with management of television news channel ANCA to discuss allegations of editorial interference and censorship against it. At the center of the storm was ANCA news chief Kanthan Pillay, who apologized for his social media post on Twitter directed at the channel's former political reporter Namecalling Maseko. Now the tweet sparked public outrage. Pillay wrote, and I quote, "Rats swimming towards a sinking ship," end of quote. And this apparently referring to Maseko, and who resigned from ANCA to join the SABC. And in response, Maseko made some allegations of mistreatment and editorial censorship against Pillay, who has since been fired.
Very unfortunate statement, to be referring to a journalist as a rat, referring to the SABC, it seems, as a sinking ship. I mean, hugely problematic. The issues, so all of those issues have to be dealt with, and at least he has actually made that apology. Though I think what's important, in terms of the meeting that we're going to have now with ANCA, and they have promised to have this meeting, is to say that, we will then look at, so those issues, of course, are on the table, but very importantly, the issues around censorship and the particular stories that Namecalling refers to, where he says that, the stories didn't happen or that there was a particular slant given. And we need to get to the bottom of what happened in terms of the censorship of those particular stories.
Well, following the public backlash and what then appeared to be a protest by ANCA news staff, Kanthan Pillay was summarily dismissed with immediate effect. Now that Pillay is gone, is that the end of the story? Well, let's find out from our guest editors. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Welcome to the program. And in from KwaZulu-Natal, you're missing your beach time, but thanks for joining us. Let me start with you, Joe. When the story broke out, what were your thoughts? I mean, a lot of people were trying to figure out what the channel was doing when they withdrew from the EFF conference in the first instance, but then things just started to snowball after that. What were your impressions as this was playing out?
The strange part is that, Peter, they went against their slogan, fear or favor. The fact that they took a stand with a solidarity with other media houses, to me, that is also a problem. And as time went on, and this whole thing was more like water. At some point, it will break out. It will come out. It's not the first time things like this happen at ANCA. The challenge is that the guys that are there, some of them were scared to come out. So something had to happen for this whole thing to come out. And Mr. Pillay, he was just one person. So now we need to question, was he the problem? I'm saying the environment allowed him to do that. So, and we have had cases, the Duke story, it has happened. The very same journalists from ANCA, at some point they were wearing black, trying to protest against the same management. So now you start to question, is it a media house that is there to alert our people on the real news, or they're pushing an agenda? As things stand now, I mean, now everyone is now using Mr. Pillay as the scapegoat. It's the whole entire management of that channel.
All right, so for you, there's a bigger story.
No, there's a bigger story in that. And
Tandy, media monitoring, that's what you do. You monitor the media. When you saw this playing out, your initial thoughts, and you know, I don't want to talk specifically about individuals, but generally for journalism, and because some of the allegations of censorship are quite concerning.
Yeah, no, they're very concerning. But I think what was quite reassuring to see in all of this was the fact that the journalists took a stand and protested and said, we will not stand for censorship and editorial interference. I think that's a very positive scenario that we saw come out. But again, it's talking to the environment of the media that we find ourselves in. You know, media are at this tipping point of credibility and trust, and we know that we've been in this situation for a while now. And ENCA can't afford for something like this to happen. And you know, I agree with Joe in saying it is the broader environment. It's never just one individual. I mean, SABC has a history of exactly this. You know, it's a structural environment, and it's a problem. But yeah, I think that, you know, questions should have been asked a lot sooner. You know, we knew that Kanthan Pillay was there. We knew he had been appointed. And that should have rang some alarm bells when that appointment was made. But we waited for a crisis to emerge to see what was going on.
All right, so Shoni, crisis management is what you know well, and I'm not a PR expert, but it just seemed odd a little bit for me that when this story broke, the Twitter spat began. We didn't hear from the organization. We didn't hear from the leadership of the channel. And then we heard an apology from the person himself. Channel still hadn't distanced themselves from this individual. And then the next day, the staff protest, and only then did you get a statement from the organization saying that this man is fired. It just seemed to me that perhaps they were reacting rather than taking charge of the situation.
Absolutely, Peter, and it didn't do the brand any good in terms of credibility, to the point that Jeremy Maxey, the editor-in-chief, said himself that in this game, your biggest currency is your credibility. And, you know, the slogan that we usually use is tell the truth, tell it fast, tell it fast. And they didn't do that. You know, it's like they were pushed to actually come out and say something. And that says a lot about the culture that my colleagues here have been referring to within the organization. So clearly, it points to a bigger structural problem in-house. But furthermore, you know, we live in dangerous times for journalism and the fraternity as a whole. To me, when the credibility of the media fraternity is being questioned, our democracy is in danger, because they are the people who actually make sure that our democracy thrives. I mean, think Nkandla, think many things, think hashtag Gupta leaks and so on and so on. We never would have known, we never would have been here, we never would have had a commission of inquiry if the media did not play their role to actually expose those. So when suddenly the media are seen as instruments by, you know, in a bigger play by other people, you know, propagating, or rather behind other nefarious causes, it's very, very worrying for the entire, it should be worrying for the entire country.
All right, so you said that it's a bigger story, and I'm just wondering if it goes beyond just the NCA. I mean, this perhaps could be an example, but there's also a whole range of other media, print as well, and I just wonder if this kind of censorship stroke editorial management kicks in sometimes, and that journalists are just maybe too scared. They've got cars to pay for, mortgages that they need to manage, and they just put up with it.
Peter, it's a fact. It happens. It's a matter of time. I think based on this story that came out, we are likely, in 2020, there will be more things that are likely to come out. Coming back to the ANCA story, just to touch on, the ANCA, Mr. Pillay, he was quick to suspend Namecalling, but he tweeted something else. He was then told to apologize. Then the following day, when there was a protest in solidarity with Namecalling, then something happened. Now it makes you question in the management, as my colleagues have said, in the management, that what is it that they were waiting for? Now you start to think, when Thandi indicated very well, in his appointment, what was the agenda? Now it makes you question that. So now you'll start to look at all these media houses and their structures. And now it would go back, who is the main person in these media houses? You know, there is a gentleman, a media mogul by the name of Rupert Murdoch, who is known to influence how the media houses should drive. So that will also put a lot of journalists into a very awkward position where they should just come out. One guy said to me, any story that has an editor is not real.
That's interesting.
You see, so
all right. So Thandi, there was another discussion this week, and this is one that I've tried to explore several times because I spent some time in the UK, and there you know that if you pick up the Guardian newspaper, it's pro-Labour.
Yes.
You pick up the Times, it's pro-conservative, and you know what you're dealing with. You go to America, Fox is Republican. End of story. CNN perhaps being accused of being about Democratic. So the question is, can ENCA or any other media house that's private do what they want and editorialize and pick a side and so on and so forth? Is that not what democracy is about? As long as they say that that's what they do.
Well, I think there's a very fine line between, being an absolute pro one side or the other. The role of independent media is to be that. It's to be independent, it's to be objective, it's to tell the full story. But you're not going to get a private, or it's going to be very difficult to find a media house that's absolutely objective on every single level and doesn't take a position on either side. But as you say, it's absolutely about accountability and transparency about your position and whose interests you're serving. We had these similar conversations before ANN7 was taken off air around, whether it should be allowed to be a broadcaster. And it was, again, interesting because, it was sort of, well, as long as you are, again, very transparent about whose interests you're serving, then shouldn't you be allowed to have that voice and opinion? And the danger that we're seeing with ENCA is that this kind of situation, people are going to call or you're going to start hearing people saying, but we shouldn't have this on air, we should have other institutions. And South Africa, we as a country and, globally, you need more media than not. And especially here, we need more broadcasters than fewer. We need more diversity, more plurality around media institutions. And so it's completely about accountability and transparency and maintaining that independence. And I think ENCA dropped the ball on that one.
So, as a reputation damage has happened for sure, there's no question about that. Can they recover? We've had this conversation about Sunday Times that kept on apologizing week after week at some point. And we've got to this point now where, they were already under pressure for some time. Then EFF, people might say this was populist and so on and so forth, but maybe they seem to be vindicated or not, I don't know, but can they recover reputationally from a situation like this?
Absolutely. And however, it's not all about, it can't all be about talk. To go out there and say, yes, this should not have happened, we accept that. But what are you going to do? Because clearly there are cultural issues organizational culture issues within ENCA. So they need to start coming out and talk about how they're going to fix that situation, because like my colleague said earlier, we've had other issues in the past. So if the way that the public will believe that they're actually mending their ways, if they're actually going out there publicly and talk about what it is that they're doing to try and change the situation. Going out there and make statements, we've seen that, we've had that before. It doesn't work. But actual concrete action that shows that you're actually changing the course of your the newsroom that it's going to take from here onwards. That might convince a number of people that they indeed are serious about the fact that they regret what has happened and they intend on changing it.
Yeah.
No, just to add on to that quickly, I think that it can be done. I mean, look at SABC. Look for where the institution was 3 years ago to where it is now. I mean, we're not there yet, but there has been a lot of progress, and I think that it is on the road to recovery, and I think media institutions can, regain that credibility.
And indeed, Peter, this is the reason why journalists are moving from other institutions to the SABC, because it's shown to be of a different caliber now.
Yeah. So you can't call anybody a rat, particularly when we think about what happened in Rwanda. This name calling on media, it can be very dangerous. Yes. Should that not have been the point this man either got suspended or fired? They didn't take action.
Peter, it goes back to what Tandy said, that when he was appointed, it was a red flag already. But now, why was he there? Whose agenda is he pushing? Why was he so free to say such? Remember the story of the cockroaches, and then other people take it upon themselves to just do away with a group of people based on the name calling. So I think it's the environment where he sits with whoever that he sits with, where they don't really see the value on the people that are contributing in their core business called news. So I think it's a structural and the culture and how these guys see the people that are working in their business. Look at how many people who left there and come this side. How many people leave elsewhere and go back there? You can, if you do the counting, most guys leave SABC, go there, 15 minutes later back at SABC. And then how many people went back to maybe it's one guy. We did a count last night when we were discussing the story. Very few people go back there. That should be telling us a story. One young lady left there, she joined a certain union. She was there. She protested alone. She wanted to tell the world what was happening there. She ended up leaving. And it continued. And as my brother said, it will take a while for them to do away with this thing. He was the only person who called someone a rat. How many other people?
Yeah. We'll discuss this a bit more in another kind of context, journalism safety, because I think sometimes we always look at it externally, but sometimes I think these issues play out internally, but we'll do that in a short while. We are going to take a break shortly, but before that I think it's time for us to go back to our news archives, and today we take you back to 1997 when President Nelson Mandela called for South Africans to unite at the unveiling of a bronze statue honoring struggle icon Steve Biko. Let's take a look at how the SABC covered that story that day.
President Nelson Mandela today seized the opportunity to make an extraordinary appeal to all political parties to work together towards national unity. He made his appeal at the unveiling of the Steve Biko statue in East London. Saying there were good people in parties, President Mandela called on all the leaders at the ceremony to step forward and tell the country why they were not prepared to work for unity. He confirmed that he'll be retiring as leader of the ANC and head of the country, and said he wished to appeal for unity before he retired.
It was an extraordinary day in East London. In an unprecedented move, President Mandela utilized the 20th anniversary of Steve Biko's death to call for national unity.
What I want to know is why we cannot unite, whatever the name is. Why is that we cannot work together as one organization? We may call it the African National Congress, We may call it a ZAPO. We may call it the IFP. We may call it any name that we want. What I want them to answer, why are we not working together?
He called the leaders of the PAC, IFP and ZAPU to the stage and asked them to commit themselves to this cause.
There is no reason why we can't work together. Absolutely not.
A large constituency of ZAPU supporters threatened to disrupt proceedings at the City Hall, but the President reprimanded them in schoolmaster fashion.
We have had here rowdy, undisciplined, raw children trying to undermine a great occasion of this nature. And yet, I nevertheless still love them.
The President said each leader should know when to quit, but he insisted that he would like to see both his and Biko's dreams of a more human South Africa fulfilled before he retires. Something he's not doing just yet. He was up early this morning, and his first stop was in Mxenge home in King Williamstown. Later he paid his respects at the graves of Griffiths and Victoria Mxenge. Then it was time to honor the man for whom this day was put aside.
I have never had the honor of meeting alive Bantu Steve Biko.
Mr. Mandela also visited the Biko residence before departing for the day's most important event, the unveiling of the statue. And it was here that the significance of Steve Bantu Biko's legacy was most evident.
Today is not just a day for Steve Biko. It's a day for all those people who suffered in the struggle for freedom.
The crowds could not be contained when the country's most important person arrived and paid homage to one of the country's biggest heroes.
His hope in life and his life of hope are captured by his resounding words, and I quote, "In time we shall be in a position to bestow on South Africa the greatest possible gift, a more human face."
The John Foster Bridge outside East London was also renamed the Steve Biko Bridge, yet another testimony to the fact that Steve Biko may be gone, but definitely not forgotten. Tertia Kruger, SABC, East London.
Welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor. Now, 2 years after photojournalist Shiraz Mohammed was kidnapped whilst on assignment in Syria, he's now a free man, we believe. Now, this is according to Imtiaz Suleiman of the humanitarian organization Gift of the Givers. Mohammed, who was taken hostage in 2017, apparently managed to escape his Syrian captors and cross the border into Turkey into the hands of Turkish intelligence. Well, Gift of the Givers on Sunday said that they were relieved with the latest developments surrounding the abduction of Mohammed.
We don't have the details, Leanne, but he is in the hands of Turkish intelligence. That was over the weekend. You know, that the people who called us to say that they have Shiraz, they sent us pictures of proof that they had him with them, and pictures of proof that they were sending him across the border into Turkey. At that point, told us that he was in Turkish intelligence. But that was now Saturday, Sunday, Monday. It is possible at some point that Turco, should have contacted the Turkish government or the other way around. And the normal procedure then is they would hand Shiraz over to the South African embassy in Turkey. And then the next phase would be for the embassy to prepare a document for travel. He probably doesn't have his passport with him, and his visa is already expired because it's only a 1-month visa. Yeah. So a new document has to be made, flight has to be booked, and he should come home, very, very soon. There's no reason to keep him there delayed for several days or weeks. He should come home, which is a normal process. So once the government has said we have them, they hand over foreign nationals very quickly.
All right, so that's Imtiaz Suleiman from Gift of the Givers, and with this harrowing ordeal for Shiraz Mohammed in mind, and with wars subsiding, it's being reported though that a record low number of journalists were murdered in reprisal for reporting. The total number of journalists killed because of their work fell sharply in 2019 to 25. And that's the lowest level in 17 years. And that's according to the Committee to Protect Journalists, the CPJ. All right, let's chat a little bit about journalists and their safety. And this Shiraz Mohammed story, let me start with you, Joe. He'd been gone a long time. We still don't know if he's actually fully safe. And in fact, the family is still concerned.
Yeah, it became a challenge for the family because they felt that Gift of the Givers should not have given out details, because no one is sure currently, because they're getting phone calls from different people who are claiming. There's no formal statement that came from Turkish intelligence to South African embassy there. We have not heard any word from South African diplomats that are there to confirm that. So the family felt that the hopes were raised while there's no concrete information. It was just a rumor. It was a phone call that was made. And we have a lot of people that disappeared, a lot of journalists that also disappeared, but we don't get to know about that. So another thing is that when you are in the field as a journalist, there's that thinking that you are safer because you are press. You have this thing called press. But those people that are in a war zone, there's a pro-West journalist, there's anti-West, there's pro-Asian, there's pro-Middle East. So you always be caught in a crossfire, like it or not. We have a lot. There was a young lady that came from the Europe in Turkey, found out things that were happening, that some governments in Middle East were funding ISIS there, and then she was killed, she was banned, and those are the cases that I see these guys called CPJ releasing those. I don't know where they're getting their information from, but there's more journalists that are at risk that get killed, and nothing happens with that. So as far as the safety is concerned, it's one area where you just have to look after yourself. What the media houses want, or your editors, is the story. That's all they're looking for.
I mean,
by any means necessary.
When we come back home here in South Africa, we've seen quite a few disturbing events where reporters are either in Alexandra or somewhere, and they've got their microphones in their hands, and you see angry people coming to grab these microphones and sometimes saying, leave, you cannot report here. And that is a concern, and it's still happening, sadly.
It is a concern, and it is happening, but it's also, I think, representative of, well, let me rather say it's not something new. I think that since the dawn of journalism and the role that the media play, you're going to have those tense situations, and you're going to have those who are being held accountable pushing back against those who are who are holding them accountable. I think that when you're talking more sort of so-called on-the-ground reporting, where journalists are in the field and the subject of the story is pushing back, I think that becomes really critical, because why don't you want journalists to tell the story? What is that relationship between the community and the journalists, and why, and that becomes a problem, and that needs to be unpacked and explored. In terms of, general safety of journalists, I think what we're seeing is a really interesting switch of maybe, again, the research that came out, not too sure, exactly where the stats are coming from, but if there's been a decline in actual murdering of journalists, we need to look at other threats that have come up, and in terms of other technologies, and now that you're able to use online technologies to harass, to intimidate, and get the same impact, you're still creating this air of censorship and intimidation. So you're withdrawing, well, journalists tend, and that is very close to home. We've seen a lot of that happening on our doorstep in the last few years.
Yeah, you know, I've got to be honest, Shoni, when I pick up my Twitter account, I think and then think again about what I'm going to say, because constantly you are aware now more than ever about public reaction, misinterpretation, ambiguity in any one word that you might use. And I just wonder if social media has contributed to this new kind of dangers to journalists.
Well, I would say obviously more people are now engaged in the news because to some degree of social media, because now more people have access to what's going on, although, you know, a lot of the social media stuff, it's inconsequential, but, you know, it has allowed more people to have access to what's going on. But just coming back into the issue of safety of journalists, I mean, to me, the leadership in any country determines how safe the media will be. I mean, if you look at the leadership, under the leadership of Jacob Zuma, we have journalists like Mzilikazi wa Africa being kidnapped, and it's no big deal. But you know, when the moment Ramaphosa took over in South Africa, the tone from Luthuli House was completely different towards newspaper or media reports that were not necessarily favorable to the party or government. So it clearly set a new tone, and to me, the leadership contributes a lot to whether the safety of journalists in this in the country, or any other country for that matter.
Oh, that's an interesting point that you raised there. And in fact, it takes us to this clip that I want to play. So, our business lead, Thandeka Gqubule-Mbeki, spoke on one of our programs during the course of this week, and she raised an interesting point, kind of pointing towards the rise in populist politics and what happens to the media. This is what she had to say.
Let me just start by saying that today is an important day globally to examine issues of media freedom. And the global and the international press are examining these in a spirit of self-criticism and in an analytical way, as well as looking at the threats to this hard-won public right to, and it's a constitutional right in many countries, including our own, to media freedom. Now, with the rise of populism throughout the world, we are seeing a direct link between the attacks on journalism and the attacks on individual journalists and media houses with the rise in populist movements. Now, the rise in populist movements has seen a bit of a boom since the downturn in 2008. When there are economic crises, when there is a recessionary climate and there is economic gloom, populist movements normally take legitimate concerns about benefits for the ordinary people and elevate these, and as these should, and they use these to rise to power, and they create a symbiotic relationship between the press and populism. The EU has distributed a video for journalists and members of society about the symbiotic relationship between the rise of populism and our coverage of those.
So that's our business lead, Thandeka Gqubule-Mbeki, saying that there's a relationship between the rise of populism and how the media get treated. And I think about the US, and I see Donald Trump, and he was pointing at certain media houses, "You are fake news, I want to talk to you." And there have been accusations of certain political parties in this country, how they've risen on the back of some of these social issues, and have made statements in public on social media that have translated into threats to journalists. What's your take on this populism versus the journalism?
Peter, it all comes from the fact that who's funding these media houses? You know, it goes back there. So Trump will make such statements because he's fully aware that CNN is pro-Democrat, Fox it's pro the Republicans. So that side, it's clear what is happening. So when you take it back to us here in South Africa, It is there, but it's not as visible as, because we're still trying to uphold the standard of journalism in South Africa. But time after time, it has to come out. You might have seen particular political leaders taking pictures with certain journalists, then a couple of months later, the very same people are fighting a tweet. So that makes you question some relationships, some stories that are written, what agenda was being pushed at that particular time, and what happened now. So there's a lot that is happening behind that comes out in the social media. Meanwhile, if you dig deeper, you'll be shocked the things that are happening. I mean, you have an official, a government official that will tell you that I paid certain journalists for a certain story to go away.
Yes.
That is a problem. That tells you that it's deeper than what we're discussing right here. So for me, I think it's bigger than what we can see.
All right. Tandy, populism and the way it translates into how media is attacked.
So I think we need to remember the sort of fundamentals of the kind of media environment that you want, and it goes back to media freedom, freedom of expression, and independent media, and those are sort of the key pillars that you need for media to thrive in a functional democracy, and that is what we try and push for and uphold. You know, in South Africa, and you're already seeing tensions around that. The minute you bring in the whole populist politics aspect, you start pushing back at those, you know, fundamental democratic principles, which of course you're going to, you know, push back on freedom of expression, on the freedom of the media. And again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about accountability and transparency. The minute you have a media doing their job and holding those in power accountable, if those in power don't want to be held accountable, you're going to get that tense relationship between media and politics. And, you know, I think it's absolutely accurate in saying, you know, the rise of populist politics is going to change how media operates, and I think we are seeing that across the world.
Yeah. And you know, a good example that I remember quite vividly was the invasion of Iraq, Saddam Hussein era. And sides were taken, and those journalists in those newsrooms that were not in support of the attack in Iraq were vilified. I mean, I remember French fries, they changed their name because they were anti this invasion of Iraq. And a lot of journalists took flack from mainstream because of that. And I just wonder, if with that as a backdrop, is there a danger of that happening here? Because politicians chant slogans, they talk about certain things, and they just throw out these statements that this media is this, that media is that. And that can translate into a vulnerability for these media houses.
No, absolutely. In fact, the safest side for journalists is always to be on the side of truth, transparency, and honesty, because not so long ago, everybody was all gaga about Ramaphoria, and it's very easy to suddenly start to find yourself in a difficult situation when Ramaphosa is doing things that he should not is not supposed to do, and you supposedly developed a relationship with such a person. The embedded journalists in Iraq, of course, how easy was it for them to actually report, you know, accurately about what was happening on both sides of the, you know, of that war? It was very difficult, of course, because they were embedded with one side, and it's very dangerous for I think journalists to find themselves or align themselves with any one side. Rather, they do what they're supposed to do. You know, stay on the side of truth, transparency, and honesty.
All right. Well, let me tell you, one person who knows all too well about how difficult it can be to be a journalist is the Eswatini-based editor of the online publication Swaziland News. He himself had to flee South Africa due to death threats he received in 2018. He joins us now from Eswatini to give us an update on what's been news this week in his country. Zweli, Dr. Zweli Dlamini, thanks so much indeed for joining us. So welcome to the program. So it's been quite a busy week for you. I know that there's been some raids, and I don't know if that's translated also to pressure on journalists.
Yes, Peter, there's been too much pressure for us as journalists here in the Kingdom of Eswatini. The political landscape is shaking, and even us as journalists, we are in danger because the police are raiding political activists and independent journalists who are seen as a threat to the current political dictatorship are also under threat by the police.
All right, take us through what happened this week. I know that there were some raids, and this is in your publications this week. What was that about? I know I spoke to the police commissioners, the police spokesperson, and they said that nothing was going on other than normal policing at this time of the year. But your take?
I can safely confirm, Peter, that the police spokesperson was lying. What actually happened is that when the king bought the Rolls-Royce cars sometime last month, a political activist complained, and in fact, that action of the king resulted in the political activists calling for democratic reforms because they felt the king is abusing state resources because he enjoys absolute power and he cannot be questioned. And then what happened thereafter? The king is said to have summoned all the security forces, the bosses, to a meeting whereby he complained that why are they allowing these political activists to undermine his authority. Thereafter, as I spoke to the SABC earlier on, if I remember, I was interviewed by Lulu from the SABC, where I predicted that massive crackdown on pro-democracy activists are expected. So the king is said to have ordered the security forces to harass these political activists as an act of intimidation. In fact, there's an order or a decree that they should be arrested and charged for treason, and that order includes even us as independent journalists.
So, I mean, you've written some articles pointing to the royal house, like the cars when they came in, for example. When you're writing these stories, are you always kind of thinking about what might be the repercussions?
Peter, you know, as a journalist, you always owe the public the truth. We know sometimes it's risky to publish such stories, but there's nothing we can do because the public is expecting the truth from us. So we only serve the public. So our intention is to tell the public what is really happening because the king has been enjoying immunity for a long time, and most of the people in the Kingdom of Swaziland or Eswatini, they were not aware that the current social and economic problems we are facing as a country, the king is directly involved because he's abusing state resources. This has been caused by the fact that the media here in Eswatini is captured, and they are portraying the king as a person who is like a moral, an angel. So most of the time, the cabinet ministers, prime ministers are blamed, and the king is left alone. In fact, here they will even tell you that you can criticize the government, but don't touch the king. But the problem is that the king is directly involved in politics. So we risk, Peter. I can confirm that it's a risk, but there's nothing we can do. That's what journalists are expected to do, because at the end of the day, the public demands the truth from us, and we must do exactly that.
All right, Zweli, Martin Dlamini, always a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much indeed. And we wish you strength in the coming year as you continue with the work of being the editor of Swaziland News. And that's where we'll take a quick break right here on Media Monitor, and we'll take a look at local newspaper headlines coming up after this. Stay with us.
They need to step up and take responsibility.
He believes that these banks were actually enablers of state capture.
I met senior directors of HSBC and Standard Chartered. I found a great reluctance from both of them.
Reverend Frank Chikane was very actively involved in calling out state capture.
The Guptas will tell you If you don't do what we want by Wednesday, you won't be a director general.
The murder case has implicated some senior public servants. Tell us more.
Indeed, this case has gained more traction as we see after an auditor has testified on the financial flows between Siemens and Bagili.
Department of Community Safety, Security and Liaison and the Department of Health had promised that it will strengthen security in all hospitals in the province. That has not yielded any positive results.
Our job as the SA Today team doesn't simply start when the cameras start to roll. We also work tirelessly behind the scenes to keep you up to date with stories of the day.
What have you established as an organization, or rather as an association, regarding this WhatsApp group Stokvel?
If you look at the WhatsApp Stokvels, people join irrespective of whether they know each other or not. So the person joining is faceless. The one recruiting is also faceless. It's a disaster.
Watch SA Today every day from 3 p.m.
Right, welcome back. We're going to start taking a look at what's in our newspapers on this Sunday. And before we do that, let's just show you what's on the front pages. And we start with the Sunday Times. And the headline says, "Capture Kingpins Going Down." This refers to Eric Wood, referred to as a middleman at the center of state capture. The boss of the controversial Trillion Group is set to be charged for amassing super wealth from the hundreds of millions of rands stripped out of Eskom and Transnet after he met the Guptas and their Lieutenant Salim Essa. The City Press has what seems to be many front page stories, ranging from looking at the decade that was, that's 2010 to 2019, to how people are spending their Christmas holidays, and also words that have become part of our lingua franca in the last 10 years, such as slay queens. I'm still not quite sure what that means, to be honest with you. This is the paper's last edition for the year. And in the Sunday Tribune, ANC staff apparently are facing a miserable Christmas as the ruling party allegedly hasn't paid their December salaries. Apparently, ANC General Manager Phoebe Potgieter has already communicated the party's dire financial situation to employees in a letter dated December 15. The Weekend Argus on Sunday shows images of the burial of former gangster Rashid Staghi. This, as a 5-year-old, was shot dead in the backyard of his Lavender Hill home whilst playing with his little brother. The little boy was shot at the back of the head trying to protect his 2-year-old brother after 3 armed men stormed into their yard. He's the latest victim of gang violence on the Cape Flats. All right, so those are just some of the front page headlines. Let me start with you, Shoni, this time. I don't know which one grabbed your attention.
Well, on the front page of the City Press, actually, there's a story about a Samaritan who went out of his way to pay debts of several thousand people.
Wow.
Totaling about 350,000 rands, who had lay-by accounts at one of the retail stores, which I thought was quite remarkable, considering the kind of economic climate that we're in. And it still shows that actually South Africans, in their own small way, we're actually a very generous people.
Yeah.
And that kind of showed that.
It is a nice, sweet story, isn't it? I mean, it's so you go, lay-by is when you go to a shop and you almost pay a deposit and say, I'm going to come back and pay it off and get those goods.
Yeah.
So he went to the store and he says, anyone who's on lay-by, pay the rest of it, and then you then later go and get your thing. You think you've got something still to pay, and they say, no, it's been paid for.
In fact, one of the customers was actually thought that the lady at the till was actually playing jokes with her. And so, listen.
Okay, so the one that grabbed my attention there is this. I mean, this is a decade gone. Although I still don't know when a decade starts and ends, because For me, a decade starts 2020, doesn't it? The next decade.
Yes.
So to 2021, actually, because that's the first year of the next decade. But anyway, that's another discussion. Slay queens and other words that we use in South Africa. I don't know. I mean, you know, what are your thoughts about some of the lingua franca that's come through? Bless eyes and other words. It's been quite a 10 years, Joe.
We are one country that, no matter how bad things can be, South Africans will always find humor in everything. I mean, remember the story that came out, some people are called tigers and stuff. So you will see people posting something, say, spot the tiger, between these two guys. In spite of all of that, I mean, we come up with all sorts of mapiano. Mabena, you know. So we evolve.
We're very creative.
We're very creative.
And again, social media, I guess, probably has contributed to this rapid
it's also
rise.
helping in moving certain things around. I mean, I remember watching Ahmed Katrada. In his interview, he said when they came out of prison, they heard of words off ramp.
What's this?
What's off ramp?
Yes.
Mall. What's the mall? So now there are people now, slay queens. There's kids that are coming up now. It's normal. It's words that we use. The blessed. There's certain image of a guy to say this guy looks like a blessed. You know, we even paint a certain picture. So it has been very interesting on how we don't get stuck in one thing. I mean, we make fun of chiefs, we make fun of pirates, even if it's soccer.
I'm going to move along because we're running out of time, but Tandy, who's not a slay queen, I don't think, but what has grabbed your attention? Which
I think, you know, talking about using humour to cope with, or as South Africans using humour, I think that's what City Press has done with their front page. You know, I think it's actually a little bit disappointing. I'm not sure if this was the best choice to go through for your last edition of 2019. You know, images that moved the nation. I would have loved to see something like really powerful on the front page. So I know we seem to be picking on the City Press a little bit, but you know, that's that. And it's also I'm hoping to see more about the exposed kingpin and state capture. You know, I think that if we can start holding those accountable and actually doing something concrete, that's going to be a good start to 2020.
Joe, Sunday Times or?
Look, sometimes I wonder if they won't come back to apologize. So that's my problem now.
That's optimistic.
But look, it's a good story that people are being exposed, but we only see one side of things where it's only exposed because we are aware that there's the other side that we have not heard of it. So. You look at same thing. You look at the headlines like this. Okay, which agenda? Or where are they going with this? Meanwhile, there's this that is there. So for me,
I suppose it's encouraging that for a long time people have been saying we're watching the state capture inquiry, but no one's actually getting arrested. But it looks as if that it's starting to happen, and maybe 2020 we'll see this more often. You're not sure. I'm not convinced.
Yeah, we can only hope.
I think a fugitive with means, we must remember, is a very difficult person to capture. And this is what has happened. And this is why even the prosecution, the process of getting there will take some time, because this is not nobody from nowhere. These are people who are very well resourced, and they're going to get the best legal minds to try and stay out of prison.
All right. You know what? Unfortunately, we run out of time. I wish we could continue discussing some of these issues. But thanks so much indeed. You guys are always great, and thanks for coming through and helping us unpack some of these big stories. For you at home, thank you very much indeed for watching Media Monitor. I hope that you'll join us again at the same time, same place next week for more of the same. For me and the rest of the team, have a great day and a wonderful week ahead. Take care. Bye-bye.